Hey everyone, welcome back to my shop. We got a fun one today, and to be honest, this was one that I really didn't want to build, but I had a really awesome client, that being my wife. She persuaded me, and we got it done. Actually, as I got into it, it turned out to be a lot of fun. We got a few drawers that we got to make. We got some doors, and up top, this will open up. We will have an adjustable shelf. This was built from the walnut that I just had in my shop, and I ran just a little bit short, so I've got to get a piece of walnut and make a shelf. But other than that, we've got a lot of fun here. I got pretty creative making the panels, and that was a lot of fun. I'll show you how I did those. So if you want to stick around, we'll get into our build. So we're going to get started this morning with some walnut here. We're going to make our top, bottom, our fixed middle shelf, and our sides to our case. And as you can see, this walnut is not the best that I've worked with. It's got a lot of curves and some checks and things like that. But I think we're going to be able to use this. We'll break it down and mill it up, and we'll be able to make our parts and pieces and get what we need out of it. So as I said, this walnut's been sitting around my shop for a while, and it's kind of leftover boards from other projects that I've been working on. And so I'll begin by cutting those down to a rough length, and that allows us to have less waste when we mill those up. And so as I plane those and run those through the jointer, we'll be able to straighten those boards without losing quite so much material on there. And so I typically will always cut my parts to a rough length before I start milling those. And here we're just going to line those up for grain selection, and then we'll go ahead and joint those edges to glue those boards together to make our panels. So with a little work of the joiner and the planer, and then a trip through the table saw to give us a parallel edge on each board, we've got all those straight. We'll be able to glue these up, and then they will go through the planer again to bring them down to the final thickness, and we'll have some usable stock. So most of the time when I'm working on furniture, I usually use Titebond 2. Probably most of you are familiar with that. It's just kind of always been my go-to. But this time around I'm going to use Titebond 3, and the reason for that is this cabinet will be in a bathroom. And so with the shower and stuff like that, you're going to have steamy conditions. And so we're going to have more of a waterproof glue as opposed to water resistant. So that's something to think about if you're building furniture for a bathroom or something that might have some moisture issues. So that's what I'm going to use this time. So here I'm gluing up our side panels, and I'm going to do both sides in the same set of clamps. They're narrow enough that I can fit both of those into one set of clamps. And that'll just help me save some clamps for some other glue ups. And after letting those sit in the clamps and dry for a little bit, we're going to use some epoxy, and we'll fill in our cracks and our knots. And I usually will let this set overnight while that cures and hardens. And then a quick pass through the planer to bring those back down to proper thickness. Now we need a frame for the back of this cabinet. This frame will be responsible for hanging it to the wall. We're going to use a French cleat system for that, and I'll show you how I do that as we go along here. But I'm going to use, I guess you'd call those bridle joints to connect this frame. And I'm just using plywood. Plywood is nice and stable, and you don't get a lot of movement out of it. And so I typically will use plywood for frames and structural parts and stuff for the pieces that I build. And then we'll use this chamfer bit, and we'll do the top rail and the bottom part of the mid rail. And I'll do that in 2 passes, and that's where the French cleats will hang that on the wall. And I will stop that just before it hits the side. Now we'll go ahead and just take a handsaw and we'll cut those into the corner and give us a nice square corner on that chamfer. I'm going to take our side panels that are out of the clamps now, and we're going to square up one end and cut those to length. And then we can go ahead and begin cutting our rabbets and dados for our different pieces to go together. And so here I'm cutting the dado for the bottom shelf. This will be the shelf that holds the drawers. And here we've got the top rabbet that will be for the top. And this is the fixed middle shelf, and we'll be running some dados on that as well as the bottom shelf, and that will hold the dividers for our drawers. We'll have 3 drawers. And now that we have those rabbets and dados cut, we'll go ahead and cut all of our panels to width. And I like to do that, and that way I can just cut off any tear out that might come with cutting those dados and rabbets. We're going to go ahead and dry fit this together so we can get some measurements for a few things. This will be our groove for our back panel. And then this will be our middle shelf, so we'll just go ahead and raise that bit a little bit and just cut that right off to the same width that we cut that back, the groove for the back panel. And then we'll go ahead and trim that back panel to size. And you'll notice I'll take a little bit off of each side of that, and that's to keep the book match centered. And we'll square up one end and we'll cut it to length. Okay, so we've got our case all dry fit together here again. We've got a few more things we need to do before we glue it up. We're going to go ahead and sand all the internal parts. We'll break it down, sand all those. We're going to put some holes in the sides for the upper case for an adjustable shelf. And then we'll go ahead and pre-finish the back panel. We want to get a good finish on both sides of that. So without any further ado, and no more gilding the lily or something like that.
And so, without further gilding the lily, and with no more ado...
And so, as I mentioned, I want to make sure that I get this finished on all the sides and the edges. And I made sure I put a nice good coat on there and let that soak in for quite a bit. Then we're going to go ahead and wipe that off. We're going to attach our back frame to the back of the cabinet using biscuits and glue. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut those now. And then we'll go ahead and drill our holes that we mentioned for the adjustable shelf. Now we're going to turn our attention to the panels for the doors. And so we'll go ahead and resaw some stock here. So this morning I've been working on making the panels for our doors. And since those are going to be kind of a focal point of the cabinet, what I did was I took some of the ends of the ugliest boards that I had, and we're going to see if we can't make those some panels that should look really good, hopefully look really good. And I was really excited about this, the way this one cut out. I've resawed these ends in half, these pieces, and then of course now we've got a book match, but we're going to have 2 doors, and so we're going to separate those into the different doors. And so I've taken these pieces, and these are also book matched, and this was just another ugly end that I had, and I've been playing around with them, doing different things to see how the grain and stuff should line up, and even looking at changing these, putting these at an angle, cutting a straight edge and making a new angle, which I think is what I'm leaning towards here. And so I just wanted to kind of show you where we're at. What we need is we need a panel that's going to be finished at about 8.5 inches wide and about 20 inches long or so. So we're going to see what we can do. We'll go ahead and fill these voids and stuff with epoxy. But I'm going to cut these and kind of make sure that we can make a good panel, and probably even glue those up first, and then we'll go ahead and do the epoxy after that. So having finally chosen a line to cut those boards at, I just ran those through the bandsaw to cut a straight edge, and then I'll use the joiner to straighten up that edge. And I've got both of those panels taped together there. And then a pass through the table saw will give me another parallel edge there. And so I went ahead and glued those panels up, and while those sit in the clamps, I will turn our attention to the face frame of the cabinet. And so we're milling up some more walnut for that. I like to run these through the planer, and that just allows that all of those parts are exactly the same width. And some pocket holes to attach those together. I like those pocket holes for face frames. They go on the inside and you'll never see those, and they work really well for just attaching those face frames together. And we'll attach that face frame to the case with some biscuits and glue, so we'll go ahead and cut our biscuit slots. And I did test fit all these biscuits before putting that on there. I just like to make sure we don't run into anything, any surprises when we glue that up. And plenty of clamps to let that sit till it dries. Here I began cutting some parts for our doors. And this will be the top rail of the door with the arch. And then I made a template to give us a consistent arch on each of those doors. So I'm getting ready to run the rails and the stiles for some doors, and I've got a door making bit set up in my router here. And I just wanted to kind of give you a little tip that what I do when I want to use my fence for at least the straight pieces of the door. And so I set that bit up and I set my fence so that it's just a little bit back from that bearing. Hopefully you can see that, just a little bit of play there. What that does is that gives me the support of the fence, but also allows me to push that piece right up against the bearing, make sure we get the full cut. We want to make sure we get a good cut there, so that when we cut the opposite to that for our joints, they fit together real well. So just something I like to do. And it's always important to use a feather board when cutting pieces like this, using bits like that to make sure that that piece stays tight to the table. And also I like to use a pin when using doing these curved pieces, just to help guide that into the router bit. And then over at the miter box, we'll carefully cut those top rails to size. And we'll coat those ends for the joint. And again, I pre-finished that panel before gluing those doors together. And then just using the table saw to pre-fit those to the case. Okay, so I've done a couple of things here that I didn't share with you on camera, just mostly boring things. I've made a couple of spacers here, and these go inside the bottom drawers on the side, and that's just to give a guide for the drawer side on each side, because we do have that lip there. And so that's what those will be for. I've also sanded the case outside with 80 grit, and that's just kind of a preliminary sanding there. And then I've started pre-fitting the doors, and also I did glue in, this is just a 1/4 inch strip of walnut here that I just glued to the back of the face frame to just give me a little bit of a lip there for the doors to close against. And so I've started to pre-fit those, and we've got a little bit of final fitment to do on those, but we'll do that after we get the hinges drilled in. We're going to use European hinges, the concealed hinges, and so we'll go ahead and kind of final fit those doors after we get those drilled and get those attached. But just kind of some preliminary stuff and some fitting there to move on to the next step, which will be to build some drawers. So I turned to my Porter cable dovetailing jig to do the dovetails for these drawers. I like that jig because you can do both sides of the joint in one operation there. And then we're just going to mark those drawers for the depth of the case. And we'll cut those sides to length. Then we're going to go ahead and use some scrap pieces to cut a dado in the end for the back. I guess I'd call that maybe a hidden rabbit construction method. If you know a better name for that, let me know. And a groove in the bottom for the bottom. A groove in the bottom for the bottom. That makes sense. Okay, so I went ahead and spent a little time gluing up my drawer boxes. I've got those all glued up. I've got those sanded. We've got those somewhat fit to the case here. We've got some more to do. We're going to go ahead and give them a little bit looser fit, but you can kind of see where we're at now with those. And being in a bathroom with the steam and stuff, I know we're going to get a little bit of movement and stuff out of there, so I'm going to make these fit just a little bit looser than what they do right now. But as you can see, I've kind of got those fit to the case. We're going to go ahead and leave those where they're at right now, and we'll go ahead and fit our doors. So what I'm doing here is just marking the corners where they're a little bit close, and we need to square that up a little bit more to the case. And then I'm just using that little piece of shim just to move that just a little bit, just to take a sliver off of there. And I did that for each of the corners that needed it, and then went ahead and set those to the case. And then I cut the center stiles. I trimmed those off after installing the clamps, or installing the hinges and getting those attached to the frame, and then setting that center gap to just where I wanted it. And I'll play with those hinges a little bit to get those fitting just right. So now back to the drawers. What I want to do is create a little bit of a reveal at the bottom, and so I'm just going to take a little bit off the bottom of that front edge. And of course we'll sand that up and clean that up. So what I've got here is another piece of walnut, and we're going to create our crown molding. A couple of passes through the multi-profile bit, and then we'll trim that to size. And I'm creating just a little bit of a rabbet on the bottom edge of that, and that'll just give me a lip to attach that around the case, as you can see me doing here. I'll go ahead and line up one of the mitered corners to get that piece of trim right where I want it, and then we'll mark that on the other side to determine our length to cut that piece. And as you can see here, it's just a little bit long. I like to sneak up on that. The best way to get a nice tight miter is to just sneak up on that fit, and then you get that nice perfect fit. And then we'll go ahead and attach those pieces with some glue and some brad nails through the top. Make sure I get plenty of glue on that miter joint just to keep that from coming apart. I somehow missed getting some footage while installing this trim along the bottom of the cabinet, but I used the same kind of trim as around the top of the cabinet. This is a piece of that trim that was around the top. You can see where I cut that shallow rabbet to install that to the case. The one difference with the bottom trim was I just cut a larger rabbet, and that just allows that to overlap the case there a little more and cover up a little more, giving us a smaller reveal here. So there it is, our bathroom cabinet. We're all finished up here. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. I had a lot of fun building this one. It's really pretty simple but elegant with the design here. And those of you who have stuck around this long, thank you for watching the video. I really appreciate that. That really helps me keep doing what I'm doing here. If you feel so inclined and would like to subscribe, that means a lot to me. I really appreciate that as well. And if you want to give that a like, and go ahead and comment something that you liked about the cabinet, something that you didn't like about the cabinet, or whatever. We try to respond to all of those. So again, this was a lot of fun, and thanks for watching.